digital assets are here to stay in one form or another, and whatever their value is, their sort of external value to the non-digital world, they are going to be around forever, ultimately, in one form or another. And it's already the case that some designer goods are more expensive or as expensive in the metaverse as they are in real life.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast series. Whether you're at school, sixth form, university, thinking about a career in law, or exploring law careers, you're in the right place. We are the one-stop shop for student lawyers. If you'd like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com. This episode is sponsored by the University of Law. The University of Law offers a range of undergraduate and postgraduate courses and master's degrees alongside an award-winning pro bono clinic, so you can build up your legal experience while studying. And their experienced career service will enable you to put your best foot forward when launching your legal career. The courses are employment focused and based on real legal practice, so you'll be better prepared for the workplace. Part-time and online study options are available so you can work and study at the same time. Click the link in the description box of the podcast to find out more about the courses on offer. Hello everyone, welcome to the Student Lawyer podcast. My name is Stephanie. I'm a current law student, future trainee solicitor, and I'm the host of today's episode. Joining me today is Dan Wyatt, partner at RPC, who specialises in commercial litigation with a focus on civil fraud and crypto and digital asset disputes. During the episode, Dan and I discussed cryptocurrency and digital assets from a commercial and legal point of view. Dan explains the types of claims that are usually in dispute over digital assets and talks about Lavinia Deborah Osbourne against one, persons unknown, and two, Ozone Networks, which is a novel case to the English courts and a milestone in the legal treatment of NFTs under English law. Dan also provides his opinion on how digital assets could transpire into the metaverse, whether cryptocurrency could ever become legal tender in the UK, and lastly, provides exceptional advice to students as to how to become commercially aware, become a successful trainee solicitor, and be on track to partnership. Dan, thanks so much for joining us here today. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Good to meet you.
Well, I'm going to get straight in with the questions. Got a lot to ask you today. But before we do go into the bulk of the, conversation today, I thought it would be nice if we could start off by asking you to introduce yourself. Perhaps by explaining what your role as partner entails at RPC and about the type of work that your area of expertise covers.
Sure. So I'm Dan Wyatt. I'm a partner in RPC's commercial disputes team. My area of expertise is commercial litigation, and within that also sits civil fraud and increasingly over the last few years, crypto and digital assets disputes and fraud. My day-to-day role as a partner, which will be the same for most partners at other firms, of course, is quite varied. So on the one hand, I'm responsible for doing and delivering the legal work, which is obviously the thing that you first think of as a law firm partner, but also I'm responsible for winning the work. So there's a bit of a sort of salesperson part of the job as well, making sure that I'm meeting people and getting opportunities to win new work for the firm. And also as a partner, you're responsible ultimately for running the business as well. So making sure that the firm is financially in good health, dealing with recruitment, graduate recruitment and associate recruitment and so forth. Now, those latter two things are dealt with at a firm like RPC. We have a lot of help for that sort of stuff. We have, internal CEOs and HR people and so forth. So my role is mostly focused on the first two bits, which is doing the legal work and winning the legal work, so getting it through the door. But certainly, you are a business owner as a partner, so it does cover all of those areas.
Well, sounds really interesting and really varied. I I always like to ask guests on the show, partners mostly, how they do, how they think maybe the best ways are to win new business. If you had to give like perhaps your top two ways of the ways that you like to engage with clients, what would you say those are?
I think it's important to keep in touch with people so that you're sort of in their minds. There's a lot of lawyers out there, obviously, and it's not always people's first choice to hang out with you necessarily. But I think you have to make an effort to keep in touch with people to make sure that they don't forget you. And then when you are seeing people, whether that's just for a coffee or a lunch or a dinner or whatever, making sure that you're interesting and engaging and a fun person to have around. There's nothing worse than having a really dull conversation with somebody. So I think it's important to sort of bring the best version of yourself, whatever that may be, to any meeting with a prospective client, to make sure that they actually enjoy working with you. It's sort of it's taken as a bit of a given most of the time that you can do the work to a high standard. So I think the next most important thing for a client is to make sure they actually want to work with you on cases that can last for months or for years.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that was a question that I've been asked in training contract interviews before. So I think that's a really useful piece of advice. So thanks for sharing that, Dan. So why did you choose to become a solicitor and specialise in commercial litigation with a focus on civil fraud and crypto and digital assets?
It was a little bit by accident. I thought a law degree would be a good degree to have. I've got no history of legal professionals in my family, so I was sort of the first one to do a law degree. And then having done the law degree, or having done half of it at least, I thought that it would be good to try it out as a professional lawyer, rather than doing something completely unrelated. So I had a go at applying for a few training contracts and so forth, and got one happily. So it wasn't a sort of a deliberate decision that I made age 10 or whatever to pursue a long-held desire to be a lawyer. I actually thought at that stage that I would want to be a corporate lawyer, doing deals and M&A and so forth. And then this was I quickly changed my mind when I started my training contract, and I think that's the beauty of a training contract, is that you get to experience different areas of a law firm and different practice areas. So I did a couple of I did a corporate seat, and I did a couple of other non-contentious seats in my first year as a trainee, and very quickly realised that wasn't for me after all. And in fact, when I then started my second year as a litigator in a litigation seat, I immediately realised that was what I wanted to do, and found it far more interesting and engaging. And so it was very clear to me very quickly that I wanted to be a litigator as soon as I did that seat. And so I think that's, as I say, the beauty of the training contract is that you get to experience different areas, and you might not necessarily end up doing what you think you would be doing at the start of your training contract.
Yeah, I mean, you do hear these stories quite a lot about people not getting the top choices of their seat preference, and then absolutely falling in love with it, and qualifying into that practice area. So the lesson I've taken away from that is keep an open mind. Exactly. It's nice to hear your story.
Yeah.
At this point now, I'm just going to go into an introduction of crypto and digital assets. And perhaps for our listeners who are unfamiliar with the terms, Dan, if you could please summarise what is meant by crypto and digital assets, because they're slightly different, aren't they?
Yes, no problem. So a digital asset, without wanting to state the obvious, is an asset that is held digitally rather than physically. And cryptocurrency is a type of digital asset, so it's a subset of digital assets. And the term digital asset is much broader than just crypto, so it includes other things such as non-fungible tokens or NFTs, which you'll have heard of as well, I'm sure. All of these sorts of digital assets are held on technology called the blockchain. And a blockchain, like its name implies, is basically a way of structuring lots of data into chunks or blocks that are then strung together in a chain. And the blockchain can be summed up in 3 words, really. The first is ledger, the second is public, and the third is decentralized. So the ledger is essentially a digital file that sets out who owns which digital asset, so Bitcoin or whatever else, or an NFT. and transfers in ownership of that particular asset are recorded by changing the ledger. So it's basically just a massive record of which transactions are taking place, who owns what, and everything is updated sort of constantly. As for public, all transactions on blockchains are public, so anybody can download a complete history of the transactions that have taken place on, for example, Bitcoin, or view any of them on what's called a block explorer, where you can look at transactions that have taken place. And there's a block explorer, for example, is blockchain.com. And the third word, decentralized. This is perhaps the most important in some respects, because the participants in the network, in the particular blockchain network, have their own copy of the ledger. And there's no centralized master copy. For example, in the financial system, you'd have a bank holding a record of transactions, and that doesn't happen in digital assets. The copy of the ledger and all of the transactions are held by multiple parties called nodes, which are the entities that sort of hold and administer the ledger. And the way that everybody agrees what is the correct copy of the ledger and what transactions have taken place is known as the consensus principle, because it involves all of the nodes in the network agreeing that a particular transaction has taken place and is proper. And that's an important fraud prevention tool, because you can't just go in and amend the ledger yourself, because that one copy of the ledger will not be consistent with the other thousands of copies of the ledger. So it will be obvious that something has been tampered with and the transaction wouldn't be accepted. So it's quite a useful way of making sure that everything is as it should be. So they're digital assets, and that's in very broad terms how they're held on the blockchain.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm sure many will agree with me. For something that is actually quite a complex and complicated topic, you've explained that really clearly. So thank you very much. So when there are disputes involving cryptocurrency and digital assets, what is actually typically in dispute?
So you can really have a dispute about pretty much anything that you would have a dispute about in the sort of non-digital world. So it can be a very diverse range of issues. But I think there's probably three sort of classic buckets of disputes. So one is ownership. So who owns a particular digital asset? Has that party agreed to transfer it to somebody else but failed to do so? Has there been a fraud, for example? So those sorts of cases come up quite commonly, and a lot of the cases that have happened so far in the digital asset space have related to frauds and ultimately who owns a particular digital asset. The second type are claims related to the value of an asset. So has an asset or its value been misrepresented during a sale, perhaps? How much is that asset actually worth? And do you need the courts to assist in determining that? And then the third type of claim is claims relating to risk. So has anyone misrepresented the risk of trading a particular digital asset? Either negligently or perhaps fraudulently? Have they said that an asset is a safe investment, whereas in fact it's not at all, it's very volatile? That sort of thing. And then if a risk of trading a digital asset has come to pass, so a trader has lost a substantial amount of money, who should be liable for that? Is it just the trader's fault because they traded a risky investment and they shouldn't have done and they've lost money? Or is somebody else to blame for some reason for the trader's situation? So those, there are all sorts of claims, but they're sort of the three types that we most commonly see.
Sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. So what are some of the main tasks of an associate and maybe a trainee as well within the disputes resolution practice area? And if we could maybe focus on cybercrime.
Yeah, sure. So it's very varied work in commercial disputes generally, but particularly also cyber crime. And so the tasks that you'll be doing as an associate or a trainee can range from sort of drafting work, so drafting notes of advice to clients, helping with drafting claim forms, application notices, that sort of thing. Also helping with drafting witness evidence, so the evidence that you file at court to explain your sort of position on the factual issues in a case. That can also be done by, can be done by trainees, and also, is led by associates generally. So those sorts of tasks are the things that people tend to like to do the most. The drafting tasks tend to be the most interesting jobs. There are also less interesting and glamorous tasks as well, is the reality for trainees and associates, particularly on really big cases. You can spend a lot of time, if you're on a big case, doing a disclosure review, for example, which is looking for relevant documents amongst many thousands of documents. You can also, you are also in charge of preparing bundles for court hearings and so forth. And both of those jobs can be less engaging at times, but they're extremely important to the running of the case. And the good thing about them, in one sense, is that you are, as an associate and as a trainee, you're responsible for delivering that with much less oversight than sort of drafting, where the work that you draft will be amended by senior lawyers and partners and barristers and so forth. So you get a lot more sort of responsibility, I think, in the disclosure area and the bundling area. So it really is up to you to deliver what needs to be delivered on time and in a good format. So a huge range of tasks for associates, and often, particularly in the cyber space, things will have to move very quickly. So you'll have to get up to speed on a case, and prepare written documents and the bundles and so forth very quickly over the course of a day or two, to make sure that you get into court really quickly. If you're trying to freeze frozen assets, if you're trying to freeze digital assets, for example. So that can be pretty hard, long hours, but also pretty exciting and pretty satisfying when you get the result that you need after 2 or 3 days of really hard work.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for sharing that. Just touching back on what you were saying about the bundling. It just sounds, the bundling, and that not always being, checked as something, as a drafting exercise, maybe. It highlights that the person doing it has to have such immense attention to detail and focus. And it's just, doing these, what somebody may think is a small job, but making sure that job is done really well. And that's something that I really noticed speaking to different professionals, legal professionals, is they keep highlighting that point. So, it was good to hear you say that as well, just reinforces it.
Yeah, that's right, and I think you'll never have fear quite like being a trainee at a court hearing when the judge says, where is this particular document, or what page number is this? And there's sort of a pause. You're on sort of tenterhooks as you're waiting for the page to come up, and have I put it in the right place? Have I done the bundle correct? Have I made a mistake? And that sort of sigh of relief as you realise that page is okay. So the whole court hearing as a trainee, there's a lot of pressure, because it has to be right, and if it's not right, you might get a nice judge who's relaxed about it, but if it's a very highly charged, difficult case, you might get the really grumpy judge that is really, really annoyed that a document isn't where it should be, and so that's where you really feel the pressure. And once you've had a hearing like that, and perhaps a hearing where you've made a mistake even, that's when you'll really realise just how important it is to have attention to detail and to get those things right.
Yeah. Wow, I've got beads of sweat forming, and I'm not even in that situation. So yeah, it does sound slightly frightening, but yeah. Anyway, now you've mentioned NFTs a couple of times, and I was just wondering, what do you find most interesting about NFTs, maybe from a lawyer's point of view?
So I think the most interesting thing about NFTs is probably what they could be used for in the future. So it's obviously interesting that somebody might pay tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds for a unique picture of an ape, which is currently a lot of the use of NFTs. But I think the more interesting thing is, as I say, what they can be used for in the future. They could potentially revolutionise the way we store certain pieces of data. And also identify ourselves. So, for example, in the future, we might well have passports in NFT form, and or driving licenses, and other things such as medical records or certificates from your degree and so forth could be stored in NFT form. And I think they're the sort of really innovative uses of NFTs that could be really helpful in the future. And I think it's going to be very exciting to see that develop and see see what the tech is used for ultimately, and also, the legal cases that arise out of those uses.
Excellent, thank you.
I'd like to take a moment to speak about the University of Law, which is the university I decided to study my LPC at. The University of Law is the sponsor of this podcast and makes it possible for us to continue bringing these episodes to you. So we really appreciate you supporting us by supporting our sponsors. What really sets the University of Law apart from other universities is its belief in training students for the real world from the moment they accept a place. The University of Law's experienced career service and award-winning pro bono clinics offer students the chance to get real-life legal experience which can boost employability. They offer a range of undergraduate and postgraduate legal training and master's degrees designed by qualified experts to help students excel at any stage of their career. Their courses are employment-focused, honing key skills in a teaching environment based on real legal practice. Part-time and online study options are also available on many of their courses to help students work and study at the same time. If you'd like to find out more about the courses on offer, please click the link in the description box of the podcast.
So I thought that we could talk a little bit about the Lavinia Deborah Osbourne case, if I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Can you please tell us what the facts of the case were, what was in dispute, and the outcome, please?
Sure. So Ms. Osbourne had a series of NFTs stolen effectively. They weren't in her wallet where they were held when she checked one day. And so the case was about that, really. It was about the theft of the NFTs and what should happen. She identified, using one of the public blockchain tracing sites that I mentioned before, she identified where the NFTs had been moved to, so they'd been moved to another person's wallet. And because of that, she was able to apply to court with a pretty clear idea of what she wanted, which was to freeze those assets where they were being held. And to freeze them means that the English court says that they must not be moved until further notice while the case continues to trial. And she also sought the court's assistance for various disclosure orders. And this is the typical suite of relief that people seek when they've had their digital assets stolen. So it's normally freezing relief, freezing injunction, and disclosure relief. And the disclosure relief is really important because although she could see where the NFTs were sat, the wallet they were held in, what she didn't know was whose wallet that was, who it belonged to. So she didn't actually know who to sue, and that's very common in digital asset disputes. So her claim was against persons unknown, which is the sort of the legal phrase that we use when we know where assets are. We want to try and trace them and freeze them, but we don't actually know who has stolen them in the first place. So that's what happened. She applied to court. They weren't particularly valuable NFTs, but they were quite sentimentally valuable to her, and she wanted to have them back, which is fair enough, because they are unique. So she sought that relief. She was granted that relief. And in the course of granting that relief, the English court confirmed two things, which was the first time it had done so in respect of NFTs. So the first thing was to confirm that NFTs are property, and that, or at least there's a good arguable case that they're property. So at this stage of the proceedings, you don't have, Ms. Osbourne didn't have to prove that NFTs were property on the balance of probabilities. What she had to prove was that there was ultimately a good arguable case, that they were a good enough case that the court would order the freezing relief and disclosure relief that she sought. So the court agreed to that standard, which is a lower standard, but still an important development. And the court agreed that NFTs are property like cryptocurrency. And the second thing that the court found to the same standard was that the stolen NFTs were being held by the unknown fraudsters, the persons unknown, as constructive trustees on behalf of Ms. Osbourne. And that's important because it increases the range and the power of remedies that you can seek in the proceedings to ultimately get your get your stolen NFTs back in the longer term. So those are the two novel findings in that case.
Wow, sounds like a big important case. So did she ever get her NFTs back?
There hasn't been any public reporting of it, so I'm not yet sure. I mean, it's a reasonably recent case, so if it's proceeding along the various stages of trial, perhaps, then we wouldn't yet have heard, because it will take some time to get there. It may well be, having got that court order, or those court orders plural, that the people who stole the NFTs have spoken to her and settled the case, but we don't publicly know at the moment.
Does she have the tangible things? What exactly were the NFTs? Are you allowed to tell us?
Yes, so the court judgment does describe them. I forget the exact detail, but they were sort of artwork pieces of NFTs. Right. Essentially, a digital image of some sort.
Right. I was just wondering if she actually had the image at home with her to at least give her some kind of comfort. But
well, no doubt she could display a copy of the NFT in principle. But obviously the whole point of NFTs and the value in them is that you have the unique original NFT. Having a screenshot of it on your phone or something isn't quite the same, albeit it does the same job to have it on your phone background, but it doesn't obviously have the same legal value that the underlying NFT has.
Of course. Well, I hope Mrs. Osbourne gets it back soon. So I was hoping that we could do some future gazing now at this point. So I'm wondering, Dan, what do you think, what place do you think cryptocurrency and digital assets will have in the metaverse?
Good question. If you'd asked me 6 months or more ago, before the crypto winter, I'd have said, without doubt, a very large place in the metaverse. There's obviously a bit more uncertainty now because of the scale of the crash that's taken place and this extended crypto winter, which is unlike anything we've seen before, even in the sort of the short time that crypto has existed. But I think the reality is that it still will have a large role to play in the metaverse in time, for digital payments and for collection of digital assets. It will just take time, I think, to come back from where it's come from, where it is at the moment. And we'll just have to see how things develop. I think ultimately digital assets are here to stay in one form or another, and whatever their value is, their sort of external value to the non-digital world. So I think they are going to be around forever, ultimately, in one form or another. And it's already the case that some designer goods are more expensive, or as expensive, or at least they were pre-crypto winter, in the metaverse as they are in real life. So there's been a few examples of designer handbags, for example, actually being more expensive to buy in the metaverse than their real life equivalent, which to some people might seem a bit crazy. But I think it just reflects, how much demand there is for digital assets at the moment, and how they are a bit of a craze, and probably not a passing one, even if there is this prolonged winter at the moment.
Yeah, well, it's an exciting topic to follow, I think. Now, we've spoken about NFTs being classed as property. Do you think that it's fair to say that cryptocurrency could never become legal tender due to cryptocurrency as well being classified as property by quite a substantial amount of case law?
I don't think it's fair to say that it will never, be classified as legal tender, just because of these findings in the English court at the moment. I think we're in very early days of crypto adoption, particularly in the mainstream, and I think we'll have to just see how things develop and where things end up ultimately. There's certainly a lot of talk at the moment about various nations issuing their own state-backed digital currencies, and if that gathers steam, particularly in the sort of more developed world, then it would obviously be surprising if the UK didn't follow suit, and other large developed jurisdictions. But I think we'll just have to see where things get to.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your insight into the future there. So moving into the part of the interview where we give advice to our student lawyers. So if you could perhaps explain, in your opinion, what the top qualities of a trainee solicitor are and an associate that's on their way or hopes to be on their way to partner.
Sure. So there's all sorts of obvious answers to that you'll hear all the time. Like diligence and resilience and hard working and commercial awareness and all those sorts of things. And they're obviously all super important in their own way. And particularly as you're sort of trying to progress through being an associate and making partner, the skills you need do change slightly, and the commercial awareness piece and the ability to win work becomes more and more important. But, at the other end of the scale as a trainee, it's really important just to do make sure that what you're doing is perfect. So the bundling was an example. So it's slightly perhaps on the smaller chunky chunks of things that you're doing have to be done very well, and with attention to detail, as you mentioned earlier. But I think my mantra, which I've sort of lived by my whole career and still do now when thinking about what clients need, I always just think, and I certainly thought this as a trainee and as an associate, how do I make the person's life easier who I'm working for? So as a trainee, the actual supervisor, whether it's associate partner, as an associate, it's the partner, and also in both cases, it's also the end client as well. And for me now, it's obviously mostly the client, but also perhaps a senior partner on a case I'm working with. And I think if that's your mindset, if you always just think, well, what will make the partner's life easier, what will make the client's life easier, a lot of the other behaviours and things that you have to do to be a good trainee and a good associate follow. So, do I need to work late tonight so that the partner has an easier life by having the document at first thing in the morning, the next morning, those sorts of things. So that, that diligence comes into that, hard working comes into that, resilience, if you're doing that for weeks on end, all of those sorts of behaviours are driven, I think, if that's your overarching question. So I've always found that's been quite a good way of looking at things during my career.
I think that's excellent advice. Thank you very much for sharing that. I mean, I'm sure that this differs for different pieces of work, but when you give pieces of work to associates or trainees, what kind of questions do you think are best for trainees or associates to ask you in order to ensure that they are completing that piece of work to the best of their ability?
As you say, it also varies massively from task to task. I think the key is that it's you need to make sure you understand the task fully so that you can produce the right output. So if there is any doubt, it is important to ask questions about whatever you're confused about or whatever you need more information about. But I also think sometimes when a partner gives you a piece of work, it can be worth going away and having a think about it first before sort of blurting out, the first three questions that come to the top of your head, because sometimes with a bit of thought and working it out for yourself, you might be able to answer some of those questions. And if you can answer them yourself, then that's all to the good, obviously. It may well be that after you've done that and you've thought it through yourself, you still have questions that you want to ask, and that's obviously completely fine. And it's much better to ask questions at that early stage to make sure that the product you're delivering is exactly what it needs to be, rather than trying to muddle through without asking the questions. But I think, it is important just to not sort of shoot from the hip too much and ask questions that could be a little basic, perhaps, had you just gone away and spent a bit of time thinking about it first.
Great, thank you for sharing that too. So how do you recommend that student lawyers develop their commercial awareness and increase their ability to talk about commercial and legal issues with ease?
It really is. There's no substitute for reading and listening to reading papers, reading weekly updates and listening to podcasts, current affairs podcasts, all that kind of stuff. And I think you just can't do enough of that ultimately. You obviously have to have some time to do other stuff, which is perhaps more interesting day to day. So I'm not suggesting this becomes your entire life, but I think it is important just to skim the news every day, to listen to some current affairs podcasts, to keep abreast of what's happening. And you will then have a good range of knowledge of things that are going on in the world, the sorts of factors that are relevant in business deals and that kind of thing. A better view of the economy and what's happening in the economy and how that might have impact upon the legal world. So all of those things are good. So I definitely recommend that. And I think it's also really important, if you can, to get experience of working with law firms and seeing, commercially what happens at law firms, whether that's via formal vacation schemes and summer schemes and so forth, or even just informal work experience for the odd day or two, to see how law firms work, to see what commercial issues matter to law firms. And you can't really beat being inside a law firm and learning in that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really like to listen to podcasts, and what I did when I was, I still do this now, I follow people that I really like, and found people that I like by just typing in, I suppose, buzzwords like ESG and corporate law.
Yeah.
And what you tend to find then is something that's not so mainstream, where you'll hear a discussion about it. And that's really nice to listen to as well, because there is more of a debate going on, and you hear about different people's points of view. And as well as reading, I've started off reading the FT. And I made a kind of like a habit tracker, and I made sure that I was reading 3 articles a day, which may not sound a lot, but if you're doing that every day for 5 days a week, it does all add up.
Yeah.
And I made sure to split it with things, for example, COVID, what's happening in China, and cryptocurrency as well, a little bit, but they did kind of change. So that's really good advice that you gave there, Dan. I tried it and seemed to pay off.
Yeah, no, I think that you're definitely doing the right thing, and being sort of consistent and doing it every day like you're doing is definitely the key to building that bank of knowledge.
Yeah, it doesn't make it so scary when you do it every day. When you put it down and don't pick it up for a while, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
So as we're approaching the end of the interview, I thought that it might be nice if you could let us know what your highlight of the working week has been.
So it's obviously early on a Monday morning, so it's hard to say that I've had the highlight so far, other than this, of course. But I've got a big deadline on Wednesday, as you know, because we discussed that in the context of scheduling. It was meant to be last Wednesday, but we've had an extension, so it's now 2 days' time. So getting that work over the line and in time for that extended deadline will be the highlight of my week. Obviously, if we miss the deadline, it will be a very different story. But that hopefully will be the highlight of my week come Wednesday afternoon.
Excellent. Well, I'll keep my fingers crossed for you. And I need to remind myself that it's not Friday, and I've got a nice long week ahead of me. So, Dan, before we do close the interview, I thought it might be nice to ask you if you have any final words of wisdom to share with us.
From a career point of view, I'd just say that this is a career that people from all sorts of backgrounds can pursue, even if, like me, you didn't think you wanted to be a lawyer necessarily, or you fell into it. And you can have a really good career in law, despite not coming from a legal family and having that background. So don't be put off by the fact that it might seem a bit strange or a bit scary to start in this profession without any sort of family background. And then from a sort of a specific thing, as we're talking about digital assets and so forth, I do think it's worth keeping on top of digital assets generally, what's happening and the legal developments, because I think it is, over the last couple of years, it's becoming increasingly prominent in my job. Obviously, not everybody will do work related to digital assets, but it is popping up increasingly in different areas. So if you can keep on top of those developments and the legal developments that flow from them as well, I think that puts you stands you in good stead for your training contracts when you start.
Excellent. And I'm so sorry, I have to ask you one final question off the back of the advice that you've just given. Have you had much experience working with smart contracts?
I haven't, but a few people in our firm have. And again, a very interesting and innovative area, and huge amounts of questions about how smart contracts can interact with, traditional laws and process in England and other jurisdictions. So as well as looking at digital assets and cryptocurrency and so forth, it's certainly also worth keeping abreast of developments of smart contracts and seeing where they're being used, because there's certainly huge amounts of scope for them to be very useful in large parts of business and commerce. So yeah, definitely keep on top of smart contract developments as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for providing so much interesting and insightful advice, and for being a guest on the show. I've had a great time talking with you and learned a lot. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in to this episode of The Student Lawyer, and we'll see you back again next time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
To hear more of the Student Lawyers podcast, hit the subscribe button and leave us a star rating and review. If you would like to join the Student Lawyer as a writer, please email hello@thestudentlawyer.com.